Hey, boys and girls, this is Nancy A. Shenker, the geezerproofer, here with another podcast episode that will hopefully help you live life as a beezer, somebody who be relevant, be in the moment, be curious, as opposed to a geezer who could be somebody of any age who's just stuck and kind of the antithesis of a beezer. So I'm wearing my glasses today to look a little bit wiser because I have a very special guest today. As you know, the geezerproofer is all about sex, tech, and life. And this particular guest fires on all three cylinders. And in prepping for the interview today, I came across a great quote, which is, "Data are just summaries of thousands of stories. Tell a few of those stories to help make the data meaningful." And that was from Dan Heath. And now that you know that I'm smart, I'm taking my glasses off so I could actually see our guest. And it is Jeff Weiss, who has a company called Age of Majority. So, hey, Jeff, thank you for coming on my podcast today.
Nancy, I know we've been trying to plan this for a while. I'm super excited to finally be doing this with you.
And I always like to start my podcast with a story about how I met my guest. So I've been following Jeff on LinkedIn for a while, and I'm a little bit of a data geek myself, having worked at Citibank and MasterCard for years with no background whatsoever in economics or business. One of the lessons I learned very early on is if I could get command over research data, and it was based on facts that were accumulated from consumers or businesses, it's hard to argue with data. I mean, people could always argue with the source of the data or say it's not a statistically significant sample. But if you have a big enough sample that you're polling and they tell you things, then that's golden. So how did you first get into this business? Well, first tell the audience a little bit about what it is you actually do and your daily polls, which is fascinating.
So if you don't mind, Nancy, so Age of Majority is my company, and we help companies, organizations uncover unmet needs. They can make their products or services more usable, desirable, and marketable to older adults. So that's what we do. And where we get our insights, though, we need data. We need to be powered by data that leads to insights. Is we started. It might actually be to the day. I'd have to go back and check. 4 years ago, right at the start of COVID, we started our own online insights community called Revolution 55. It's made up of adults 55 and over across North America. And we do a ton of things with them. And it's changed over the years, but now we do daily polls with them. So today's poll, I'm trying to remember. Oh, I can't remember because I just did it. But we did one, yesterday about frozen food. We did about daylight savings time.
I was going to say daylight savings time, which I have very strong feelings about because I live in Arizona and we don't change our clocks. So everybody on the East Coast is confused. But 79% want to live. They don't want to live in Arizona, but they want to be like Arizona.
They want to do away with. Yeah, they want to do away with daylight savings, and they prefer to have the sun set later versus the sun come up earlier. Anyway, so we do daily polls with this group on a wide variety of topics. I think we talk about some of the more interesting ones coming up, and we do focus groups, interviews, we do product testing. So it's a really cool place to get, as you said, data, which is so important to understand from a business point of view.
Yeah. In fact, yesterday I was having one of my weekly battles with Lifetime Fitness, who now insists that Medicare reimbursed members can only work out between 9:30 and 3:30. And I just like tormenting them. So I said, all right, what if I came at 8:30? They said, well, we wouldn't let you in. And I said, well, what if I walked in anyway? Would you have me arrested? And she's like, humming. But I said, well, is this based on research? Did you ask people 50, 65 and older when they would like to work out? Or how many of them are working? And how many of them work out in the mornings versus in the afternoon? And that's a classic case of a corporation making a decision, pretending that they're making it based on data, when in reality, they have no clue what their members really want.
It's ageist and it's discriminatory. I remember dating a girl years ago whose father was in all these men's clubs, and It was like the women were allowed to come in between certain hours and they could only use the side or back door. They couldn't go through the front door.
I know. And now older people,
crazy.
we could spend a whole episode
Yes.
just talking about that. But some of the polls that you've done, I mean, again, it's a trifecta. It's life, sex, and tech. So as you've done your polls, have there been any where you've looked at the results afterwards and said, wow, that's not what I would have expected?
Well, it's interesting because I know older adults so well now that there isn't, a lot of stuff that it's really interesting, but there are a few things. So let me I'll just share a few that we've done recently. And there is one about sex. I'll save that to the end. Oh, this is an interesting one. So, as people get older, bladder issues tend to, and I'm not going to get personal with you, Nancy.
But you can get personal. I had a guest on, the episode was called Power of the Penis. And we talked and we have another guest coming up soon who's going to be talking about vaginas. So on this show, anything goes. So go for it. Yeah.
So we were doing a project for a client. So we did a whole study, but we asked about, how many of you are encountering what we call urinary urgency? What percentage of adults 55 and older do you think have urinary urgency? A feeling of a need to pee. What percentage? Take a guess.
30?
Oh my goodness. 72%, right? So 7 out of 10 people, you go to a party, and then like at some point, someone's 7 out of 10 of them, it's like, I got to use the washroom.
And how did that shake out, men versus women? Do you have that data?
I can't recall, but it's pretty similar. I don't think it was that drastic. It's pretty, and for different reasons, right? Men, as I would know, from prostate, women from, menopause, from, pregnancy, different things. And then 61%, so 6 out of 10 are experiencing sometimes experiencing leakage issues. So it's like, people don't like to talk to taboo subject, right? And you've go to the adult diaper section, which is just a horror show.
It's
a horror show. And it's like, but it's affecting 60, 70% of people. There's got to be a better way to deal with it. So that was surprising for me.
Yeah. And there are brands like Nix, I believe, are finally coming out with sexy, normal looking panties. Because the reality is, and that's a really good example of a problem that exists among people 55 and older, but there's also a younger corollary to that, because when I was pregnant, I had to pee all the time. When I was a little kid, I had to pee all the time. So it's not like older people are disabled because they have to pee more often. It's a physiological change that necessitates more peeing. And the industry that has already made really beautiful period panties, they now need to start making really cool jock straps and boxers that look like your regular underwear. But if you happen to leak, it's not a biggie. Yeah.
So, I did a little, fortunately I don't have to wear adult diapers, but I wanted to try it out. So I did it a while ago. I did a whole video series. I talk about it in my TEDx talk, and it was not a pleasant experience. Like the actual diaper feels like,
like a diaper.
It's like cardboard. That's, that cardboard, like recycling, if it sits outside and it gets wet, and what it feels like, that's what it feels like. Right. And I didn't know which way was front or back, which is kind of important. And there were no instructions on how much can you actually pee in this before it's going to leak.
Yeah, I think women get more practice than men on that, because when we have our periods, you get a pretty good handle on what you need for the amount of flow that you have every month. And I hope we're not grossing out any listeners. So let's talk about something other than urine.
Okay. So, a couple things here. So one, we'll talk about age or present in a second, but we asked people about trust in mainstream media, because particularly election coming up, right? So we asked about that. 31%, so about a third of older adults have no trust in mainstream media. Go figure, right? And that's just the way it is now. And then we also wanted to get a sense of whether people think they can tell the difference between facts versus opinions. And then, so we did that, and most people said, yeah, I can tell the difference for the most part. But then we did a little test where we gave, I think it was 7 or 8 questions of, is this fact or is this an opinion? And the average score was 77%. So, there's still a lot of questions or a lot of what is seen as data, real facts out there that are not facts that are opinion. And when you think about the election coming up in particular, and all the stuff that's out there on social media, it's not as easy to tell between fact and fiction. And then in terms of the president, we've got two major candidates, most likely, who are older, and 87% of our revolutionaries, 55 and older, think that age of a candidate is a concern and should be a factor in voting. And out of that, 87% in total, 4 out of 10 are very concerned. So it's an interesting topic because age on its own isn't a determinant of how mentally fit someone is, right? Because we know people who are in their 90s who are, the sharpest people we know, people in their 20s and 30s who are, idiotic. But obviously, it comes into play. And, so how you deal with that, I don't know. Do you have to have just mental compatibility, competency test for any potential incoming president? I don't know. So I found that one
That's interesting because you have to be of a certain age to do certain things. You have to be 21 to drink, and you have to, the age to drive varies. You could be a certain age to get married. But, for so many things in our society, there is no screener for that. Like I always say that people should have to pass a test to get married.
You're right. And to have children, for sure.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Like the stuff that we're allowed to do in our society. It's like, there's if you're going to fly a plane, you have to go through training. But to do certain other things, it's like easy peasy. Like you're letting me do this. But, and again, back to, you can't draw a conclusion about an entire population based just on the number on their birth certificate, which is the whole idea of beezers versus geezers. Because you could be 105 years old, be smart as a whip, be in tune with what's happening in the world, and you could be 17 and be clueless.
Totally.
And have no experience in life or work. So what are some other juicy tidbits of data?
Well, let's talk about sex. And we've done a bunch of polls on sex, but the one we did recently, almost half of adults 55 and older are less satisfied in their sex life than they were 20 years ago, which to me is just a sad, sad thing, right? People should be enjoying sex. And there's, if you ever want to gross out someone younger, just tell them to think about an image of their parents having sex, right? It's just not an image anyone wants, right? So I think there's a lot of older adults out there who are still want to be sexually active, but they're not being fulfilled, right? And that, to me, that's that's a shame.
That was one of the undercurrents from my show that I recently did called Penis Power, that the urologist who was my guest was really encouraging people to do preventative care of their penises and vaginas the same way you do of your heart and your blood pressure. So if you want to continue having sex well into your 70s, 80s, 90s, there are things that you can do and should do in your 30s and 40s, pre-gaming. And then I had another guest who talked about gray divorce. So I think there's probably some correlation there, that people who are in long-term marriages whose partners have lost interest in sex just because they've been doing it for so long and it's become routine. And how do you break out of that monotony?
Yeah. And we did a project a while ago for one of the leading brands of vaginal lubricants, right? And I remember seeing, kind of what their ad agency came back and said, we think you should be advertising in Reader's Digest. And it's like, are you kidding me? Like, the only time you ever see Reader's Digest is at the doctor's office, and it's like 10 years old, right? Like,
they're not even publishing anymore.
Well, I don't know, but this was a few years ago. That's what they came back, and it's like, no. And then you look at, there are some new brands kind of doing a better job, but you look at the marketing they do, it's also clinical, and it's like, even women, it's clinical. It has to have functional, but tell me about how this is going to improve my life. What it means in my life. And they just missed the boat on it.
Yeah, I think it's because ad agencies are staffed by very young creatives.
Absolutely.
Who, when they're told to make an ad about old people and sex, like even the ED ads, it's like this old gray-haired guy on a cruise. I'm like, are they banging on the cruise? Like, why don't they make it a little more risque? Like, I don't even know that it's about sex. I think it's an ad for Carnival Cruise Lines. Like,
exactly. Yeah.
Or the woman who goes, I use this example all the time, the woman who's going out on a date and she's so excited that she's wearing her Depends in case she pees herself on the date. I'm like, ooh, like I would be thinking about, how am I going to get my pee-proof underwear off when I'm jumping into bed with this dude. Like it's like this real disconnect between how we think and how the media thinks we think.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And one of the reasons why older adults are either ignored or stereotyped is, as you said, you've got all these primarily young people in their 20s, early 30s in marketing agencies, and they don't know what they don't know. All they know is kind of the stereotypes and myths out there. And it's like, oh, I don't want to be marketing to my grandparents. And old people aren't hip. They're not cool. They're not technically savvy, which again is definitely wrong.
Yeah. In fact, I just wrote a blog about that this week. I wrote a book about AI in 2017.
Yeah.
And
right.
Like I was ahead of this curve. So
So it's these young marketers.
I call it gensplaining when someone says, "Oh, you can't possibly understand this because you were born in 1956 as opposed to 1976." Like,
and I'm the last of the boomers, so I turned 60 next month.
Oh, you're a baby.
So I am a baby. So the Gen Xers are like right behind me. So you've got Gen Xers who kind of grew up a lot more tech savvy than boomers and silent generation. So. It's just companies missing the boat again, right?
Yeah. And there are agencies that are starting to crop up, ad agencies that are recruiting people who had long and successful advertising careers to speak to this, what you call the age of majority, which I love because we, at least in terms of spending power, we are the majority. We have more disposable income than any other generation.
Absolutely.
And so younger generations better be nice to us. Otherwise, we're going to spend all our money as opposed to leaving it to them.
Yeah. And there's an interesting stat that right now, adults 55 and older in North America, I think about 30% of the population, it's going to be 36%, if I'm not mistaken, by 2050. By the year 2100, 42% of the population is going to be 55 and older. Like, think about that, right?
Yep. And by 2050, there are going to be 4 million people over 100. So that's going to be a whole new and different population, the centenarians, because they'll have seen shit and done shit that no other generation in history has ever done. Like, I was annoyed that people were like making fun of Al Pacino on the Oscars. And they're saying, oh, he must have been drunk, he's senile. But apparently the producer of the Oscars told him to skip over the nominees. And so that wasn't, and remember the year that Warren Beatty and Faye Dunaway were presenting, and everybody made Warren Beatty, including Faye Dunaway, which was ridiculous because they're like close to the same age. She made it seem like he was having a dementia moment when in reality, somebody had slipped him the wrong envelope. So, I think we need to, and Janine Vandenberg is great at talking about kind of our own biases and things that we do and say in our daily lives, including, Gen Z bashing, which I try not to do because we need to all have respect for what every generation brings to the table.
Yeah. And Janine and I have had many conversations, and we've actually done, we call it not ad battles, but we show our community, our Revolution 55 community, different ads. And some people, say, oh, this ad is so ageist, right? And then we put it out to our community, and it's interesting because of the internalization, I think, that comes into play. Some people look at it and they're so offended. That ad, there was an ad it was a LinkedIn ad.
Oh, yes. Actually. I hate the LinkedIn ad as a woman in tech. I'm like, but if you're not in tech and you truly don't know what the cloud is, or you're a geezer rather than a beezer, you go, like people think the progressive ads are hysterical, but they were my ageist company of the month. It was been Lifetime, Progressive, and now LinkedIn, because I personally found that. And again, I agree, but it's interesting because we look at it one way, perception, but we put these ads out to our community. This is where I've really been surprised about. I don't know the numbers. It's like, a third or so are like, I don't feel one way or the other about it. But then you've got a third
who say, yeah, that ad is ageist. They should get it off the air. And you get another third who say, that thing's hilarious. I love it. That doesn't offend me at all. Right. So it's really about how you perceive it. And yeah, we might look at something and say that LinkedIn ad's like, oh my God, that is so disrespectful of older adults. Like but that's the way the world sees older adults. Right. And some people are like, no, it's funny. I think that's hilarious,
well,
right?
My theory on that, which is probably closer to Janine's, is that we as a population have become so used to poking fun at old people. Like, even look at Hundreds Day in school. Like, would you ever have Black People Day in school or Asian People Day in school? But to take an entire population and stereotype it based on a number on a birth certificate is just discriminatory.
Ageism is the one prejudice that is still allowed, I guess, right? And acceptable, right? And again, I always show when I do my presentation, I usually show the skit from Saturday Night Live a few years ago for the Amazon Echo Silver, right? And it is hilarious, but it's funny because it's making fun of old people, right? And you put in any other kind of prejudice, right? Race, sex, whatever. And that would not be allowed.
One of my favorite episodes of Curb Your Enthusiasm is when Larry David and his Black roommate go into a grocery store and he makes him buy a watermelon just to overcome the stereotype. And then, and he just had an episode recently with a lawn jockey that was in Atlanta, that was a Black lawn jockey. So, he's very good at kind of taking, especially when it comes to the African-American community, taking those taboos and just putting them in your face. And so that's what I'm trying to do, frankly, with some of what I do, and use humor as a way of educating people. Because if you get too school-marmy and you go, oh, I find that offensive. In fact, these two women yesterday at Lifetime, I said, 30 years, you're going to be me. What are you going to do when someone tells you can't come into the gym because you're like me? I said, would you have even known how old I was if I hadn't told you? And they're like, oh, and they looked at each other like, oh shit. We're not going to be able to go to the gym at 8:30 before work.
Yeah.
So we'll all be there one day. And that's why it is kind of scary that this is, the last ism, which it's starting to get some momentum thanks to people like you, like Janine, like me, who are approaching this not from a scolding, school-marmy, you bad people, but from a fact-based, data-based perspective, which is why it's so important. So any other polls that you did that you were were either fun to do or surprising or...
Well, one of the, we've learned about, and we've done different polls about how important language is, right? And we asked people, what would they prefer to be called? We're not big onto labels, but, we put out boomers, seniors, golden agers, silver hair, whatever. And the reality is people don't want to be called anything, right? I
just want to be called senior, Nancy.
Right. And I'm presenting it at a senior living conference in a couple of weeks in California. And, we just did a poll. We asked people, if you had to move into a senior living community, what kind of name would be most appealing? Anything with the word senior in it? No way. Because the one thing that, I wrote an article about this a couple of weeks ago. The number one thing that businesses, marketers need to know is that as soon as you say this is for you because you're old, it's the kiss of death. No one wants to be thought of as old because society thinks old is not good, and the next step in your life is death, right? So language, imagery is so important, and there's so many rooms for improvement in that. That's come out of a lot of research. We've done a lot of different polls, but people do not want to be told that this is for you because you're old. It's because you have a certain need. I don't care whether you're 20 or whether you're 80 or 90 or 100. Sell me on what my need is versus because I'm old.
Yeah, there was actually a Jewish group here in Arizona that was doing having a festival. And it was music and it was dancing and it was for a good cause. And I signed up, and the director of the group emailed me and said, you might be more comfortable at one of our other events? I'm like, no, I like the music that you're playing. It's like trance music. And it's like, why would you think that? If you told me if I was Catholic and I wanted to come to your event, would you say that I can't come, that I might be more comfortable in a church? Like, it's kind of flies in the face of religious tolerance. And I even said to him, your mother would be very upset with you that you even the Jewish mother.
That was a job.
Yes, exactly. It's in my blood. But bottom line is, I said, look, you can keep my $18. I don't even want to hang out with you anymore, or your organization, because you're clearly ageist. Like, don't tell me that I'd be more comfortable listening to Tony Bennett than, and even Tony Bennett has recorded duets with Lady Gaga and Amy Winehouse. But like to assume that I would not want, I'm like, would it be that I would be uncomfortable, or are you uncomfortable? And I rail against the dating sites all the time. This would be a good poll question for you. Is, should the dating sites make age optional when you put up your profile? Because I don't end up in anybody's searches anymore because I'm 68, and 68 is perceived as one step away from the grave. And I do not look like my grandmother.
Yeah. And we've done some polls, I can't remember, on dating sites. But what we're finding now, though, and I'm talking to someone who's bringing a new, it's not a dating site, but there are a lot of people, older people, looking for relationships. Yeah. And some of them are romantic sexual relationships, but a lot of people are just looking for new friends who have similar interests, right? And it's very difficult in many cases, depending on where you are, to meet new people, right? So there's more options coming up now, but still, big opportunity. It's like, whether you're widowed or divorced, or you're just, you live alone, you're lonely, whatever, people want to meet new people, and they want to do things like communities of interest, right?
Meetup is very good for that. And then what's interesting is that I was doing some research on this recently. All the dating app stock prices are starting to decline, and people are not doing the online dating thing as much as they used to. And companies like Pair Ring, which is very popular in Europe, it's a ring that doesn't say anything, but it's a piece of plastic that indicates I'm single and open to talking to strangers. It's called one of the world's largest social experiments. Actually pretty clever, but as I said, it's caught on in Europe, not so much in the US. They do live events through an app called Thursday, which is like a meetup. You have Match and Bumble now starting to sponsor live events, because what I love about live events is people don't walk up to you and say, how old are you? What year were you born? You're meeting people on the basis of common interests and common energy level, and not being asked to define yourself as a senior, a boomer, whatever the moniker is. And I think it's a good example of using, tech on one hand to get people connected in the right way, but people want to meet in real time now, particularly after going through COVID, right? So it's like using the tech to find people of similar interests who you might want to meet up with, and then ideally having events where it's comfortable to go and to meet with these people. And not have to define your age as soon as you walk in the door.
Absolutely.
So sadly, we are out of time, but I would love to have you on as a guest again later in the year with new data and new findings. As you know, you can find The Geezer Proofer. All of our episodes, we're up to the 20s now, which is great. Goal is to get to 100 by 2025, and I'm going to have products and other things that I'm going to be offering as an offshoot to The Geezer Proofer. So, little sneak peek. You can listen on Apple, Spotify, wherever you happen to get your podcasts. And then we also post the video on Vimeo and on YouTube if you would like to see our lovely ageless faces. And I encourage you all, again, to be a beezer and not a geezer. And if you want to take Jeff's polls, I do them probably 5 out of 7 days a week, because it's really important that the media and product companies get accurate data. Going back to where we started, data is everything. You could argue with opinion, but you can't, you could still argue with facts, but numbers are numbers are numbers. So how do people reach you? Where can they follow you? This is your shameless self-promotion time.
Awesome. Thank you. And I'd love to be on your show whenever, because I could chat with you for a lot of different things for a long time. So for our community, it's called Revolution 55, and you can find it at revolution55.com, and easy to sign up. And then you'll participate in daily polls. We have incentives. We have a lot of fun. And then we share back. One of the interesting things, as you know, Nancy, we do is we ask a poll one day, and then the next day we have a new poll, but we share back what the results were the day before. So that's Revolution 55. If people are interested in, I've got a 15-minute TEDx talk that I did last fall. And it's really about how to get over your FOGO, which I call fear of getting older. Because getting older can be the best part of your life. And I talk about kind of these 4 key pillars. So if you look, Jeff Weiss under TEDx Talk, you will find me there. I'm also on LinkedIn, easy to find me. And then on Instagram and on Twitter. On Instagram, I'm the chief evangelist, not evangelist, evangelist. And on Twitter, or X, I guess we call it X now, it's at Crusader Jeff.
And could you?
So I'm a crusader an evangelist for older adults. That's what I mean.
I apologize for mispronouncing your name. I called you Weiss instead of Weiss, but it's Weiss.
Yeah.
So
at least most people say Weiss, so I didn't want to correct you. And I was thinking, I'll say it. I don't want you to feel bad, so don't feel bad. Okay.
All right. No, it takes a lot to make me feel bad. That's one of the big advantages of living a long time. I'm not even going to say getting older. When you live a long time, your skin gets so much thicker. And
it's one of the reasons why, and if you listen to my TEDx talk, people are generally happier as they get older. And there's something called the U curve of happiness. That's research that's been done around the world, and people are happy because one of the reasons is you don't care as much anymore about what people think or say. Right?
I will go all the way out there because we like to curse on the show, not gratuitously. But yes, I call this my not giving a shit era, and it feels really good. And absolutely. It's nice to have no stress, or less stress. I wouldn't say I have no stress, but I really care a lot less what other people think of me.
Exactly. Yeah, no, exactly.
So that's a great place to end. But if you do like us and you think well of us, please be sure to leave a review, give us some stars, tell your friends about the podcast. And thank you again, Jeff. This is a great episode. We'd love to have you back as a guest. And if you're interested in being a guest on the podcast, we're booking now for second quarter. It's thegeezerproofer at gmail.com. So have a great day. Be a beezer, not a geezer. Peace out.